What is up, Baton Rouge? Welcome back to the Tiger Pride podcast presented by 225 Magazine. I'm Mark Clements with the fresh cut. The man bun is gone. I don't know if Jared recognizes me anymore.
If you went through that without addressing your hair, I was going to stop everything and say, no, you're not. You don't. All right. Tell folks what the heck's going on with your head and where it all went.
I feel like I lost about 5 pounds. I got the long hair chopped off. I had about, I don't know, 10 inches, 8 inches, something like that. So we snipped it.
That's what she said.
Okay. I'm gonna hold on. Let me grab this sample real quick. Let me show you what we're working with.
This man's about to go grab a Ziploc bag of hair for folks listening on Spotify or wherever. So that's a lot of fun.
In case you're wondering how you donate hair, they put it in a little ponytail. If you're not, if this is not great for our Spotify users, but if you're on YouTube, put a little ponytail, and they just so this is about how long we were working with, about this ballpark.
Yeah. So you had a lot of hair.
There's a lot of hair.
So how many of those do you have? Little separate ponies?
I think there's either 5 or 6 in here, and it's nice to. Still smells great. She washed and shampooed it. I know it probably looks gross, but this was washed and shampooed before we chopped it. So now I got to find an organization or a salon or something that makes wigs, and somebody's gonna have a beautiful head of hair.
So you don't know where it's going yet, definitively.
No, not definitively. There's a place you bring in Baton Rouge. I just haven't found it yet.
I was gonna say because folks can let us know or whatever. In the meantime, you just have 5 or 6 little ponytails of hair that you can do all kinds of stuff with. Like you can take funny pictures with your dogs with I don't know. I just brainstorming here.
This is a good idea. I was thinking my first thought was back in those old cartoons when they would you cut a piece of the girl's hair you have a crush on and put it in the notebook or whatever. I feel like I should give my fiance a piece to put in her little notebook so she can just remember my long hair forever.
What would her response be to this exact proposition?
She told me I was weird.
Yeah, and, I feel like it wasn't going to be good.
Get the hair out the kitchen was probably her first response. So what I'm hoping here is, when you chop the hair off, it's like a new. We're fresh in the system. We're getting out with the old, in with the new. Maybe LSU could take some notes here because they could sure use or go with some new.
So you trying to shave O or what's going on right now? What are you trying to?
This is maybe some opposite Samson stuff. He lost his hair, he lost his strength. Maybe we lose hair, we gain strength. I don't know. Because whatever's going on this past week has not been, well, more than just a week, but especially this past week has not been a good one around Baton Rouge for LSU fans. LSU gets trounced by Bama 55-17, which, if you would have told me that was the final score, not that it's overtly surprising, but still to watch it unfold that way was incredibly frustrating. Defense doesn't get a stop in the first half as Bama puts up 45. And at that point, you're thinking if they just keep the foot on the gas, this thing could get to triple digits. They were halfway there at halftime, just about. I don't know what question to ask. Everyone's watched the game and they've kind of dissected it and everyone's frustrated, but just having gone through it and watched the game and you have that LSU has that opening drive that seems promising. Offense is moving the ball and then you get stopped on a 4th and 1. And then from there on out, Bama just keeps putting up points and LSU can't really do much. What was, to you, just the most frustrating part to watch this thing kind of unfold and unravel pretty quick?
I would say probably the most frustrating part is that it was so unsurprising to me and that I don't think a lot of people were altogether surprised. And I think it was frustrating for some people to watch, but I think some people had just come to terms even ahead of time that it was going to be ugly and it could be this type of a game and that it could be, a 50-point blowout. And looked like it could get up to that point for a while. And then you come back, and on Monday, obviously O and company are not pleased with the performance overall, but I think there's just a level of it. I don't want to say acceptance, because I know that they will respond very quickly to that and say they don't accept this and this is unacceptable. But O said he was pleased with the offense. They scored 17 points against this number one team and those sort of things. And I don't think that's the type of stuff that you anticipate hearing from LSU after a 55-17 loss ever. And so, I mean, I know we're going to get into some of the state of the program sort of stuff, but I think the bigger where this fit as just kind of a look at the bigger picture is kind of probably the most frustrating part to me. It was an example in the way they handled it of how not good of a spot this program seems to be in at the moment.
That's a good way to put it. And I think I kind of agree with the general feel. And it's just, what's also frustrating is it feels like this happens every single week. You give up a record-setting performance against Mississippi State. You have the worst margin of defeat to Auburn in the history of that series. I mean, then this Bama game unfolds, the most points Bama scored at Tiger Stadium. It's just like it's almost like we've seen no progress. And I get that we talked about, the COVID offseason and how weird that was and how many players they lost. It's still, to me, this should not be this bad. And there seems to be no progress. And I don't know, everyone on the internet or radio shows, podcasts, whatever, is talking about it. Is it part coaching? Is it part the players? And then players talking about the mental health which is a very important thing. But it's almost like why is LSU one of the biggest programs to suffer this? And we can get into the state of the program here, but it's frustrating to see how far this thing has dropped in, less than 12 months and less than a year from the best season that we'll ever watch college football unfold and before our eyes. And then 12 months later, we're looking at a LSU going 3-7 and historically one of the worst defenses and one of the worst teams they put together. It's just, you kind of summed it up, and just the state of the program and how they've handled it. And now we're going to get into the sort of Arik Gilbert stuff, and he's opting out, and a few more players are rumored to be opting out. And it seems to be like bad news after bad news after bad news over and over and over again. And it's hard to find the light at the end of the tunnel to kind of find wiggle your way out of this negativity into a positive spin onto the rest of this year or into next year even.
And unfortunately, I feel like I tend to find that way to be pretty optimistic in a lot of ways. And we talked as recently as last week of the things that O said or says consistently of being able to build this into a national championship contender in the next few years. And do I believe that? And last week I said they did it. And so as much as it is coach speak, and they would be saying that probably anywhere, the fact that they did accomplish that mission and build from what was a really gloomy 2017 after they lost those games and lost to Troy, the storm clouds were certainly circling and a lot of tension with that program that season. And they built that to not just a national championship team, but a team that is arguably the greatest in the history of college football. And so I was giving that benefit of that doubt, having seen it. I was more concerned, honestly, and more shook by things that I heard the back half of Monday and into Tuesday than I was with anything that I watched on the field on Saturday, because coming into the new week, my attitude was still, this year sucks, both football and life wise. There's so many issues going on. And I think that a perfect storm of issues hit the LSU football team where they have that great season and everyone leaves and kind of cashes in while their stock is the highest it can ever be, because they're never going to replicate that success. And so you have this massive amount of turnover mixed with two of the three coordinators leaving and new schemes to learn and whatnot. And then COVID happens, and then you start to have a lack of success on the field while all these guys are already kind of stir crazy during pandemic year 2020, and everything just kind of fed into one another, and a lot to be frustrated with. But knowing there was still a lot of talent, there were still guys like Gilbert, there were still guys like Keishon Butte, BJ Ojolari, Elias Ricks, et cetera, to build upon. The recruiting class was still looking strong. And then you hear, oh, Gilbert might be leaving. Like, that's a real consideration. And several other players are considering. And I've heard from some coaches at other schools that a couple of guys have kind of reached out to gauge whether those places could be landing spots for them. And so I know that there's fire to that smoke. And
right.
if you see notable losses to transfers right now for a team that is already down about 20 scholarship players, then you end up having maybe not quite to the same extent as the roster management scholarship number deficit that they've had this year, but you end up with that being a longer term issue where they're still trying to dig out of a hole for years to come.
That's kind of the next thing I want to talk about is, like, with all these dudes opting out and or transferring or whatever, your scholarship numbers, I mean, they're going to be essentially capped at 25 for the, essentially. And now you're looking at a several year rebuild of trying to get this thing back on track. And then you already have, I'm not call for people's jobs here, but you have already, I guess, a shortened stick or a shortened leash with LSU fans in terms of the coaching staff. And so, I mean, how many, I'm not asking you, but just a hypothetical, how many years until you can get this thing back on track? Because it doesn't seem like next year you're competing for the college football playoff. I mean, you could argue, I guess, in 2 years when some of these freshmen who are playing are now juniors, and you hope that you can build a recruiting class up after that. But this does seem like a several year type fix to get back to where you want to be. And that's assuming that you can keep guys like both quarterbacks that are competing now, keep guys like Gilbert, keep guys like Butte, some of those guys on defense. But I mean, it's just frustrating. And then, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and I was going to say, and what we haven't referenced at all is honestly the most important aspect of all of it is the ongoing Title IX investigation that is a piece of that perfect storm of negative aspects that I mentioned that I didn't hit on specifically before. And I don't know how much we want to get into the specifics of that. It's an ongoing investigation. Hopefully we have some more definition to exactly what comes out of that in the next couple of months, but it certainly doesn't help. Even if they find out that these situations have been handled as appropriately as they could have, which does not, from the early indications, appear like likely to be the case. We've already heard of some issues with protocol and not reporting things correctly. But if things went as positively for the program image as they could moving forward, that's still something that is additional questions they have to answer and wade through in the midst of all of this. And so it's a lot going on right now, both in terms of keeping players on the current roster as well as making not just high school prospects, but their kids signing to come play football in Baton Rouge, which is crazy when you consider where we started this year.
It is crazy. And that what's funny is a lot of people say, keep tweeting or talking about was last year all worth it? I mean, I guess so. It was a fun year to go through, but it does seem like some dark times are ahead. Let's talk about Gilbert a little bit now, because I think Coach O confirmed this morning that he did indeed decide to opt out. To me, this one feels a little bit different than Jamar opting out or Terrace, even Terrace leaving midseason, which kind of was I see both sides of it, still a little bit kind of iffy on it, but they're both guys who have NFL futures this year and are going into the draft this year and looking to make that money and stay healthy, put on a show for scouts, that kind of thing. Gilbert's a true freshman, and we talk about the bad look of the program overall in a lot of different lights. For him to be opting out, saying his body's sore when he's an 18 or 19-year-old freak show.
I do want to pause there and say, I don't know that Gilbert has ever actually said that. We've heard that from O as and so I will kind of clarify that aspect, that's not a piece of this that I heard other than in O's message to the public, which gotcha. I think kind of has its own its own pieces to it.
Okay. So just in terms of him opting out, and did you hear about the homesick part, or does I think that's also part of Coach O?
No. I have only heard the body hurting piece from O talking to T-Bob and Jordy on Tuesday, and then on the coaches teleconference on Wednesday. And I don't know that really is as much of a piece of this as the way that it's being led off to be, sort of. I think that's sort of, it's become a lightning rod of reaction with regards to all of this. And I think that very well could be somewhat by design, but I don't know how much that really plays into that.
I guess going back to it, does this opt-out also feel different than the other ones who were junior draft eligible juniors as opposed to a true freshman? It seems like it almost feels like if you're opting out that it seems to me a transfer is inevitable. Maybe they can talk him back into returning next year, and I don't see the benefit of a true freshman opting out with 2 games to play, 3 games to play, when you still have, a minimum 2 more years of college football to put under your belt. It doesn't just feel good. I have no inside knowledge of what his plans are or anything like that, but just the reading the tea leaves, as people say. It doesn't seem positive that Gilbert's gonna be back.
It's far of the ones that you mentioned, and I guess of all of these opt-out type moves, it's far and away the most concerning to me from an LSU standpoint because of a lot of what you just mentioned. I mean, if Jamar decides to play this year, he's playing in this weird COVID year where they were going to have some struggles anyway, and it's that 1 year, but he decides to stay out of some of the madness with a lot of uncertainty, not even meaning necessarily on the field, but that existed too. But just in terms of the big picture of how this season was going to look and be navigated, he was already a top 5 or 10 or so pick in next year's draft. And so just kind of go focus and do your thing. And the only issue I had at all with Terrace following suit was the juxtaposition of him having just given the big speech to the team about finishing strong and representing the Tigers and not quitting, et cetera, et cetera. And so I reconcile that with myself very quickly too, knowing just kind of the circumstances of the situation. But for Gilbert, they're absolutely fighting to keep him in Baton Rouge. And I think a toss up is maybe kind at the moment. It's definitely, it's not as foregone of a conclusion that this guy's going to be back for the 2021 season in purple and gold as I think some people would like to make it sound. And so that's a big piece of it. And it's a representation of not just that this season is weird and there's going to be some struggles, but of an issue for the future when you lose out on a crown jewel of the 2020 class that people talked so much about how much it meant to bring that type of a guy to Baton Rouge and what he could mean for the offense. And now to see him look like he's about had enough of it and ready to bail before the first season is over is really concerning from a program culture and state of the union type dynamic, as well as what that roster looks like from numbers and talent dynamics moving forward.
I think it also puts an extra emphasis on this offseason because you have to assume with how bad this season's gone, there's going to be some coaching turnover in whatever capacity, whether it's offensive assistants. I mean, you would imagine something's going to change on the defense, but regardless, if you can convince these guys to stick around while you make these hires, maybe you can make a kind of hire that gets these guys excited to get back on board, maybe a change in whatever sort of philosophy or mentality or something. So I think that adds an extra element to it. And then just a quick side note, when you mentioned Jamar being a top 5 receiver, reminded me of Devontae's day on Saturday and kind of the mixed, I don't know if it's emotions, but just sort of the mixed frustration watching it, but excitement of how many Baton Rouge guys were straight balling out on Saturday in Tiger Stadium, but just for the wrong colors,
Folks do not like my reactions to those things, but Devontae Smith is a fantastic young man and obviously a fantastic young football player. And so seeing him have success in ultimately anything he did and anywhere he went is exciting for all of those reasons. Just it's good to see good people do well. And for LSU fans, that's really difficult when doing well comes on a football field in a crimson jersey.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Devontae is fantastic. Christian Harris has come into his own so well at linebacker out there. Chris Allen, a guy that I've been as close to as any of the bunch that's out there, and was very close to his recruiting process, and can say LSU absolutely had a chance if they would have taken him when he tried to commit at the first time that he tried to make a move. Seeing him kind of grow up and mature out there and make some of the plays he was able to make Saturday. I mean, great for him. And then Dylan Moses, a guy that went through the injury issue that he went through and now comes back and has a chance to get back on that field for them and come back to the campus where he played most of his high school career and win a game in Tiger Stadium that kind of overlooked everything. And I mean, unfortunately for LSU fans, that list kind of goes on year to year, but I know it's tough to hear, but I mean, good on those guys, all good kids, good families, and good for them.
Always going to be Louisiana versus all y'all, especially for Jarrett, big advocate of Louisiana. So that was just a real quick note, but then so back to Gilbert. Let's talk a little bit about the on-field effects of him leaving for these final few games. You know, to start the year, obviously Jets was gone, and then Jamar opted out, and then you lost Racy to injury, and then Terrace opts out, and now Gilbert's opting out. You pretty much have lost your 4 or 5, whatever. I guess if Jamar didn't enter the draft, couldn't enter the draft, you lost your essentially top 4 pass catchers from what you thought to start the year. And I think Butte had a good day, and Jeray Jenkins has his moments, but you're just going down the list, and you know now apparently Torrey Carter, who was a backup tight end, sort of the guy who got the ball in the first play of the game, he seemingly has played his last game for LSU, and you're just chipping away at this already depleted roster for a frustrated season. And now it looks like Cole Taylor, who I think is going to be a really good tight end. He's got a big build for a young guy. And then Nick Storrs, the baseball player who is now playing football. It looks like that's kind of your tight end pair. So it looks like they're going to be relying even more on guys like Jeray, Kayshawn, Coy Moore, I guess John Trey. It seems like you're going down the list even more in terms of pass catchers that you can kind of rely on and trust.
I mean, we talked about it last week, I believe, and I said that I wouldn't want to refer to where this team has gotten as to being like a JV SEC team, because it is still a lot of fantastic college football players and I mean really talented college football players. But when you get down into the mid 60s from a scholarship player standpoint, and you're having a handful of freshmen and a handful of sophomores and a handful of transfers from FCS schools and JUCO schools and stuff like that, it starts to have that feel by contrast of the opposite sideline being the number 1 team in the country or the number 6 team in the country. And I think you've seen that be really evident with the receiving core when you go from that group last year that has a really good chance at being 3 first-round wide receivers by the time this upcoming draft is done. And then Jets leaves after junior year, Jamar leaves before junior year, Terrace leaves during junior year. And you mentioned the injury to Racy and the Gilbert departure. And so now it's John Trey, Jeray, who was a guy that we didn't hear so much about until the season. And then Kayshawn had a big game, but you got a couple freshmen. You got a guy, Trey Palmer, that they've been waiting to come around that has mainly been a special teams guy. And so it is a stark contrast as much of this program is now compared to last year.
And you said you do feel like there's probably more opt-outs coming this year, if you had to guess?
So I don't know if we hear of more opt-outs in the next couple of days. I don't know exactly how that looks, but there are certainly more guys looking into the possibility of not being a part of the team beyond this year, that are looking at potential exits, transfers. I think even with the upperclassmen, I think the re-recruiting process and convincing guys to come back for a second senior year or a second junior year, however it all works out with the additional COVID year allotted, is going to be an interesting kind of piece of all this that is always interesting this time of year, but is particularly crucial right now for this program under these circumstances. And I think as much as we typically look at that re-recruiting process as being just for juniors who are considering the NFL draft, you now have it for that class as well as the senior class who has that extra year, and a lot of underclassmen who are looking around and thinking, maybe I could transfer. With the way the transfer rules continue to develop, that might be the best opportunity moving forward. And so it's almost like everyone left on that roster, they have to go to work on and try and convince to stay.
Let's go ahead and knock out the rest of the negativity, and then I'll try to wrap up with some semblance of positive notes, because like I said, you and I are typically on the positive side of LSU stuff and don't like to point a lot of the negatives, but it's hard to do nowadays. LSU takes on Florida this weekend. They're 8-1 in the season. Only loss was a 41. Jared popping the camo on.
You ever seen me in some camo?
No, I didn't. I would never guess you own camo. That's probably not yours, is it?
Yeah, it's not mine. This is borrowed.
Well, I can't see you now.
And that's where we're at. In October, I got this from a friend to have ready when I was still doing the costumes every week, and I thought it would be kind of like a funny like gator hunt type thing. Now I'm trying to disappear into the scenery at this point in this season. Yeah,
I think a lot of LSU fans are trying to disappear into the scenery. Florida's only loss in the year was a 41-38 loss to A&M earlier in the season. They've been pretty dominant outside of that. Kyle Trask may win the Heisman. Kyle Pitts is incredible. Kadarius Toney is a beast. Florida's a 23.5-point favorite. I just don't see a scenario where LSU can win this game, so I don't want to delve too much into it. It looks like Trask is kind of this year's Joe Burrow, is what everyone is kind of keep comparing him to. Just had a decent to good year last year and has just been on fire this year.
What a frustrating way for this season to wind down for these guys, where everything's gone the way it's gone, and then you have to host Alabama, and you have people talking about a Joe Burrow, Mac Jones type comparison, and you have to see Devontae Smith have the type of season he has a week after Terrace announces his opt-out, and Jamar is obviously long gone at that point. And then you now go to the swamp, and you mentioned the Kyle Trask, Joe Burrow type comparison, and you have a Kyle Pitts, who I think in a lot of ways you wanted Arik Gilbert to be over time. Yep. And now he's gone. It's rough times for purple and gold folks.
Super rough. Florida's averaging 42 points a game. And this rivalry is one of those we talked about last week, how if Bama wanted to put their foot on the pedal and take it back to LSU for kind of revenge from last year, put that in air quotes. This LSU Florida game is definitely, there's no love lost between these two programs. So if there's another game that could get ugly and we wouldn't be surprised, it might be this one. So I don't know. Do you want to give like a quick little pick, and then we're going to wrap it up with some recruiting stuff? Because LSU's recruiting class this year is, despite all that's going on at this point, still looks pretty damn good. So we'll close with that to have some positivity. Do you want to give an outlook on this game a little bit?
Bleak. I do not feel very encouraged about this game because of everything that we just said. I don't know. I mean, I think it could look very similar to what we just watched last week, and that you're looking at Florida winning a game big. They have an offense that can score on just about anybody in the country. Their defense is probably a little bit more susceptible than Alabama's at the moment still, but has improved in more recent weeks. And if LSU has some of the struggles it has had to win up front, then there's not going to be a whole lot of success kind of reaching the tempo on some drives that would be necessary to take advantage of some of the vulnerabilities that Florida has. And so I think Florida is also up into the 40s probably.
Yeah.
And wins a lopsided game. I will say Florida 48, LSU 20.
I think the only thing I've called right this entire season was that Keishon Butte would be the leading receiver last week, and I probably expect more of the same from the LSU offense. Just real quick, did you think Finley or Johnson looked better last week, or was it kind of hard to tell because by the time Johnson got in, it was a 40-point game, so not necessarily garbage time, but just it feels like the defense is probably running some pretty basic stuff at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I liked what I saw from Max late, and you saw O talk about that being probably his best game thus far. I thought TJ had his kind of ups and downs, but they were facing, as you mentioned, different game scenarios there. And I think that Alabama did kind of relax itself a little bit by the end of that game. And so I watched that game so differently than any other game this season or in the past several seasons, and was so out of it on so many aspects of that nature by that point. I think they're both kind of still in the same sort of footing to me in terms of talented, can do some things, but you're going to have some ups and downs and growing pains. And we're having to see TJ suffer through those at much more critical points in games.
Yeah, I think in general, TJ is getting a little bit harsher critiques because he is a starter. And when you have that kind of tag, I think people just kind of expect you to outwardly look better on the field, but I think he is facing a lot of tougher circumstances in a lot of these games. The one thing regardless of who starts, I'd like to see both of them kind of against first team defenses or first team schemes, that kind of thing, just to see how they perform. But whatever direction they go to start, we'll see. Score, I don't know, man. This one's gonna. I don't know if LSU's gonna post 20. Maybe they will. The offense didn't play that bad last week. I'll say 45-17, and this is going to be ugly, but let's try to end with some good news, some good notes, because as of now, according to tigerdetails.com, LSU posting the fourth best recruiting class in the country, only behind Alabama, Ohio State, and Oregon at the moment, with 20 total commits. How many of these? I think we're 1 week away. 1 week from today, which record this on Wednesday, is the early signing period. If you had to put a number on it, a ballpark, how many of these guys do you think LSU inks a week from today to kind of head into the February signing window with, however many spots are left?
Such a great question, Mark. I think right now we're waiting to see how some of what has come to the forefront this week plays out over the next week. They were at 22 about a week ago and had 2 decommitments, but those were guys that were kind of anticipated parts of the late shuffle numbers game that LSU now finds itself in every recruiting class. And so, I mean, you'll remember we talked about last year, there was a lot of that shuffle in the last couple of weeks before the early signing period because they were trying to see, they've had a read on and some optimism on getting some other top out of state guys, and they missed on a couple that they thought they would get. Obviously had a couple guys who had been committed that they didn't think they were losing sign elsewhere too, that factored in. And so they got burnt a little bit with the numbers game last year. And now I think they came into this point in this recruiting class feeling better about the way that they would manage it and just not having the same issues or miscues this time around. But now you throw these additional curveballs into the mix. And so I think watching how those play out is going to be really, really interesting over the next week and then ultimately over the next couple months. Because I think a few of these guys were probably going to end up on the outside looking in regardless. But now there's so many unsolvable variables at this point that I do not envy the coaching staff. Certainly. I don't know that I did last year with that numbers crunch, but this year there's just so many additional pieces at play.
Maybe it's too fresh to get a real kind of vibe on it, but do you see, from what you can gather, or just your opinion, do you think a lot of these guys are taking this LSU struggle as I can come in and play early and I can be a contributor, they need me now type thing? Or are they seeing this thing unravel and kind of wanting to not jump ship, but just maybe be more open with their recruitment than they were maybe a month ago?
I think it's been a little bit of a mixed bag. I think for the most part, I have seen prospects that are committed remain positive and see it as an opportunity to come get on the field and try to help lead the program back to a point that it was this past year. I think the more that we see or hear trickle out of the nature that we have this week, that's going to be really interesting to monitor. Not so much an aspect of wins or losses on Saturdays during this weird season, but the overall kind of vibe and culture of the program and how positively these guys continue to feel they can make that future. Because if you see a guy like Gilbert leave, that's concerning to a prospect more than losing to Bama last week, even in a lopsided fashion. And if you see more guys potentially also leave and you realize that there may be an issue there currently and that you may be working at a disadvantage from a scholarship player's available number for the next year or so, it's a lot of reasons to be concerned. And so I think the conversations that the coaches are having over this next week with these prospects and their families, and as I mentioned, with everyone on the current roster, are going to be enormous for the outlook of this recruiting class and this program moving forward, because this is a big moment for them ultimately.
And still a lot of big names out there that they want to try to get on board. One of the biggest, especially around here, is Mason Smith, which you and Julie and Jimmy have kind of been the lead head honchos and following his recruiting. Do you just any sort of update on I guess not update, but just any sense of how he's feeling or what LSU is kind of pitching to him, how this one may unfold? Or I guess there's still a lot of time to kind of watch this process play out with him.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar to what I was saying in kind of the big picture, in that LSU has been in and felt in pretty good position with Mason for a lot of this fall, even despite some of the losses on the field. I'm still interested to see how things play out over the next week, just because of some of these late developments. Certainly, I mean, Julie's as close to Mason as I think any writer ever is to any prospect. And so she has a great read on him. And I think it'll be interesting to watch that they're working on his commitment video stuff whenever she gets back from Disney later this week. Already she had a pre-quarantine long planned trip, thought it was going to be all good to go, and had been monitoring stuff, but they had a chance to go make a little family vacation out there at a time they thought we'd be awaiting a potential bowl game and the regular season would be over. But she'll come back and they'll get to work on that. And I guess she'll have as much of a read on where he's going when he announces next Wednesday as anyone. But it has, I think LSU has kind of led in there for a while, but again, it's just become such a bizarre time for them. But I think he's critical. I think he's big this year. I think Will Campbell, the big offensive lineman for 2022, when we get to that point, is huge. When you have the opportunities to address some of those issues with guys that you have every reason to have success signing, you got to take advantage of those and not let them get away. And so Mason's huge right now.
What do you think Disney's like during COVID?
I don't know. I can't wait to hear. I mean, she really was closely monitoring what the COVID dynamics were at Disney and for people who had visited Disney and what the protocols and whatnot were like out there and realized at a point that it seemed like it was about as safe to be there as anywhere that she could be at the moment. And so then it was a matter of how does she explain that to her little daughter if they have to bail on that at the last minute, and did it make sense? And so they didn't fly. They drove out there and tried to minimize as much of that extra risk as possible, but I can't wait to hear what it's like. I've never been when it's not COVID, so I won't have
been to Disney ever?
No, I won't have anything to compare it to, but I'm interested to hear the stories.
It's the happiest place on earth, Jarrett.
I thought that
fans should probably go there.
Yeah, I thought all the surveys or whatever say Lafayette, Louisiana is the happiest place on earth.
I don't know about that. I guess that's true. But didn't Louisiana have like 4 of the top 10 or something, like of the happiest cities in America?
Eat, drink, and be merry, man. Lafayette's crushing it. Every time I see one of those lists, Lafayette's up top.
Speaking of Lafayette, Sage Ryan, maybe the highlight of this class. I was going to close this thing out with asking if there's a name or two guys that are in this class that kind of excite you the most, that you think could be big contributors, that you think have a bright future for LSU. I know Sage Ryan is probably one of the ones at the forefront of that list from Lafayette, so I'm sure he's happy all the time.
Yeah, I think from a current commitment standpoint, Sage is certainly up there. Love my guys, Chris Hilton and Jack Besh as wide receivers, and Matt Langlois, the defensive back. Just a lot of the in-state guys I've had a chance to see over time. Savion Jones down at St. James. And so, I mean, there's a lot of reason to be excited about those guys. And thinking of some out-of-state guys, honestly, all of the receivers are really intriguing. JoJo Earl and Deion Smith, Garrett Nussmeier, the quarterback from Texas. And, I mean, I like the class as it has come together. And so I'm hopeful that they can keep most of those guys and add a few more. Mason would be huge. If they can get Jordan Gilbert from U High, I think he's kind of a tough fight late, but he would be a great guy at a position they need. Tristan Lee, the big offensive lineman, another out-of-state guy that they clearly need a ton of help up front on offense. And so those are a couple to watch that are uncommitted. That would be really pivotal for this class finishing out too.
Fun fact, Matthew Langlois' aunt is my coworker. She's the editor of In Register magazine, which is part of the 225 family, sort of.
Good. Well, she's got a fantastic young nephew as both a young man and a football player. And I think folks have started to get excited about him, but folks are going to be even more pleasantly surprised because I think he's going to be kind of one of the steals of this class.
Yeah, so I've seen some of the plays he's made, and it's exciting. But be sure for all your recruiting updates, follow Tiger Details and follow Jarrett on Twitter at Jarrett Roser. I'm on Twitter at Mark Clements225, and of course, all the 225 magazine brands, Facebook.com/225 magazine, Instagram and Twitter at 225 Baton Rouge, and follow the podcast wherever you get your podcast, especially on YouTube, so you can see my fresh haircuts and Jarrett's camo.
You can't see me.
You can't see me. Thank y'all for listening, and we'll see y'all next week.